Kia ora koutou, kua hui mai nei, ki tēnei wāhi ki te kōrero nā whakaaro. Ko takatimu toko moka, ko Matauro toko awa, ko Waitaha Kati Mamoi, kai Tahu te arawa, oku iwi, ko Rakiura rawa Ngāti Pikiau, oku hapu, ko Te Ika Orama rawa Tapawai Hararu, oku marae, ko Nugent rawa Phyllis Skerritt, Lewis rawa Arai Gardner, oku tupuna, ko Rowena Skerritt, rawa David Brand, oku matua, no Waimumua Hau, ko Joe Brand toko ingoa. So my name's Joe, I'm the Kaitoko Mataranga at Hokanui Runaka, and I'm part of the Tua Whenua Kāhui, which is the 7 runaka with the shared interests and rights in this part of the whenua, and of that group I was the person that was put onto Te Hau Toka. And can I say, what a fabulous group, what a wonderful piece of mahi, and what amazing community Tahuna has got flourishing from the plague. We can't call it anything else, let's be honest. And really looking forward to what comes out of today. So I'm just going to open with a karakia and then hand on to Glyn. So, rarangatia I ngā tera, kia rarangatahi ai tātou, I raro iho e tēnei kaupapa. E whai nei, e rapu nei. Kia tipu, kia rea, kia mana te tū, kia ihi te tū, e rongo, whakairahia, kia tina, hui e, tā iki e. We the groups of people so we may be as one under the same umbrella as we seek and understand so we may grow and flourish as we find our feet to stand proudly. Orongo, elevate us up so we may join and bind together. Thank you. Glyn.
Tēnā koutou katoa. Ko rua peka te moanga, ko nā rua wahini te awa, ko Akarama te marae, ko Ngāti Hau te hapu, ko Ngāpui nui tonu te iwi, ko Glyn Lewis tako ingo. E mihi atu nei kei te mana whenua, nā e tahu Ngāti Mamoi Waitaha. Nō reira, tēnā koutou katoa. Hello and welcome to all of you joining today to continue the very important discussions around mental health and well-being in our community. I just want to acknowledge Adele, our chair for Te Hau Toka, and also we've got Rob, Mayor of Southland, and I think Tim Cadogan's still struggling to get through the gorge. That's the Mayor of Central Otago. So I've just said a couple of people, but you're all inspiring people. We've all had these discussions around mental health and well-being, and I'd also thank you for all being here, along with the health sector, the social sector, local government and community groups. We've all been working quite hard over the last 3 years, and we've been trying our very best to make sure our community has got through some pretty tough times. But it's those tough times we've got to actually remind ourselves of what we've actually been through. We've had border closures, families separated, repatriation of visitors, migrant residents, and for Queenstown Lakes area, our number one economic driver, tourism, falling on hard times. But there's that one silver lining out of the pandemic, and I truly believe this. It was our communities actually came together and actually helped ourselves out. It's one that has actually bound us and actually brought different silos of the community together as we move back to what is, I don't know, the new normal, if you want to call it that. It's those links, those connective tissues that we don't really want to lose again, and we have to build on it. Obviously they agree, so thank you. Right, our communities are diverse, and we acknowledge that diversity makes us stronger. We need to continue to support the well-being of all of who we come and of all of who we are and why we come to live in this region. So where are we now? We need to make sure that we continue to support the important mahi across agencies and unpaid volunteers. We need to acknowledge the other emerging issues we are facing, like staffing shortages, accommodation shortages, and all this is impacting on people's well-being. We also need to acknowledge burnout. So burnout's a big one for businesses struggling to get staff, working through what was the summer break where tourism came back at a very hard and fast pace. And also the pressure on workers to do all those double times and actually help their bosses to keep those businesses afloat. And many of those, unfortunately, don't have accommodation or a home to go back to at the end of the day. But anyway, I wish you all the best for all the good discussions today and continuing to work together on community wellbeing and resilience. Again, thank you for coming. Thank you. Kia ora.
Thank you, Glenn. That was great. And thank you, Joe, for that wonderful start. I'm Adele Cox, Chair of Hau Toka Southern Lakes Wellbeing Group, and it's an absolute pleasure to welcome you all here today to our Stronger Together Mental Wellbeing Hui. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us. Firstly, just a bit of housekeeping. The toilets are located just outside the door to the right, and if there's an emergency, please follow the Holiday Inn representatives' instructions. If we need to exit the building, there's a fire exit at the back of the room. I'm going to just take the next few minutes to take you on Hau Toka's journey before we move on to our two great speakers. Then we'll have a quick break at 11:30 and start the group discussion at 11:45, finishing at 1 today. Thank you to the Mayor for reminding us of what people have been through. It's been a really tough time, particularly the toll it's taken on people's mental health. Many of us here today work with the community in different capacities, and we've been dealing with the impacts both professionally and personally. That's why it's important for us to reflect on what's happened, what we've learned, and what we do differently next time. There's been some real highs and lows over the last 3 years, but for me, the big highlight has been seeing how much stronger we are when we work together, because out of adversity comes opportunity. And that's how Hau Toka came to life. Seeing the community-wide mental health impacts of COVID-19 in 2020 was so deeply concerning that a number of us came together to see what difference we could make. Could we achieve something by working together? We were healthcare providers, local government and social agencies who all got together to share intel, pool our resources and coordinate our responses. Our group was driven by a commitment to our communities, then continued to meet every week for 3 years, which really is quite outstanding. There is a saying that once you're part of this group, it becomes pretty hard to leave. The impact of COVID was a catalyst for us to create this interagency collaboration for regional health and wellbeing. It's for the community, by the community. That's the approach we've taken. We had originally called our group Central Lakes Mental Wellbeing Recovery Group, and the representatives included iwi, Te Whataora Southern, Well South Primary Health Organisation, Queenstown Lakes District Council, Central Lakes Family Services, and the Central Lakes Mental Health and Addiction Network Group. Later on our journey, we became Hau Toka Southern Lakes Wellbeing Group after being gifted the name by iwi. We also linked in with the Fiordland Wellbeing Collective, who were tackling similar issues, and went on to form a governance group to provide oversight and governance. And we've got some of our governance group in the room today. Our wellbeing navigators, Lisa Gear and Anna Starr, and our Hau Toka members, Marie, Joe, Karen, Tina M, Tina S, Louise, John, Chris, Jen, Sarah, and Stacey, have worked closely with agencies and networks to help coordinate an overall picture of ongoing needs. This includes listening and sharing wellbeing concerns, facilitating connections, and collaborating on ways to respond to the wellbeing challenges in communities. Collectively, the knowledge, skill sets, resources, networks, and passion for helping the community that you've all had input into has been invaluable in building awareness of available services. connecting people with the support they may need and helping them to stay well. Thank you everyone for continuing to do the hard mahi every day and for working with us. Te Hau Toka's focus has been to promote mental well-being, prevention and early intervention, and to build resilience in the community. We've done this by amplifying messages for 5 ways to wellbeing, distributing key information, facilitating awareness between agencies and providers, building community connections, and helping people to know where to get support. Our goal is to keep people well before they need acute clinical care. The impact of COVID has really helped to highlight the importance of mental health and wellbeing in the past 3 years. Our work has been informed by the new direction of travel in the Ministry of Health's Psychosocial Recovery Blueprint, Kia Kaha. That's been an important document for us to work with. Te Hau Toka has focused on the first 3 levels of the Ministry of Health's mental wellbeing framework, which has been building the social, cultural and economic foundations for mental wellbeing, fostering community-led solutions and equipping people to look after their mental wellbeing. In July 2021, a bit like a bolt out of the blue, we were granted $3 million over 2 years through the Ministry for Business, Innovation and Employment Tourism Reset Plan. The aim of this government funding was to support mental wellbeing in the tourism-dependent communities worst affected by the COVID-19 pandemic restrictions. Big moment for us, but we started as we meant to go on. Our first steps were to co-design a plan to develop and support a range of initiatives to help keep our communities well now and in the future. We've invested in some short-term initiatives to get money quickly to where it was needed most, as well as investing in some larger long-term partnerships. We also set up a microfunding initiative called Connecting Communities. Small amounts of money have been provided to many groups for community-driven initiatives to support mental wellbeing. This has been a great value in terms of community outcomes and actions. Today, Te Hau Toka want to share what we've learned, what's worked, what hasn't, our challenges and the opportunities. We also want to focus on the future. Here's what we know. We know tourism is bouncing back, but we're facing a new raft of issues like the cost of living, a shortage of workforce and accommodation and burnout, as Glenn said earlier. Increased awareness, funding resources and tools have helped support our communities through hard times, and we know that we're stronger together. Closer relationships, better situational understanding and a collaborative approach to solutions will help us find the best ways of meeting our community's needs. We're very aware that Te Hau Toka's funding is coming to an end, but the need for mental health and wellbeing support is still very real. So what's next? We want to keep the momentum that's been built over the last 3 years. So Te Hau Toka are keen to hear your ideas on how we, as a community, can continue to work together to promote individual and community wellbeing and resilience. So on that note, I'd like to introduce our keynote speaker, Emergency Management and Disaster Expert, Dr. Saab Johal. Unfortunately, Saab was planning to be here today, but due to last-minute circumstances, he's now joining us from Wellington. We've had a bit of a test to make sure it's all working. Just by way of background, Saab worked as a clinical psychologist for more than 3 decades, helping people in organisations find their way through challenging times with greater resilience and connection. He's advised the UK and New Zealand governments and the World Health Organisation through some of the major public health and disaster crises of this century, including earthquakes, pandemics and acts of terror. He's also helped to lead New Zealand's initial response to COVID-19. Saab is also a best-selling author of a number of great mental health books, including Finding Calm, Managing Fear and Anxiety in an Uncertain World. we were very fortunate to have his input into our co-design plan, and we thank him for being with us here today to share some insights. So please welcome Dr. Saab Johal. Hopefully we've got him.
Thank you, Adele. I'm hoping that you can hear me okay. You want to give me a thumbs up if you can? Just about. See, excellent. Brilliant. Thank you so much. Kia ora koutou, and thank you for the invitation to speak with you today. I really appreciate this opportunity to speak with you, and I'm really sorry I wasn't able to make it in person this time. We're busy figuring out a way for me to come soon to run the workshops. Anyway, I'm aware that I don't have a ton of time, so I'm going to crack straight into this. I want to take a trip into social connection, both in real life and online, because for most of us, whether we like it or not, this is our hybrid life now, and it's how it's going to be. And you'll know in your roles how deeply important social connection is in our response to uncertainty, crisis, and our general well-being. Social connection remains the best predictor of how well people get through crisis, and you'll also have an idea about the danger of a deficit of social connection too, and how this can lead to loneliness and even detachment from society. So I want to think about each of these ideas in more detail. Let me start with what I mean by mental well-being. To quote the WHO, good mental health, a state of mental well-being that enables people to cope with the stresses of life, realize their abilities, learn well and work well, and contribute to their community. It's an integral component of health and well-being that underpins our individual and collective abilities to make decisions, build relationships, and shape the world we live in. Here's a critical dependency, though. Mental health is determined by a complex interplay of individual, social, and structural stresses and vulnerabilities. Now, some of these individual, social, and structural stresses have been with us for a while, and some are new that we don't have a good handle on. I want to talk about some of these first before I move into some ideas about how we deal with them. Now, we know, and you know, that most people who go through a disaster will recover their mental well-being if in time, if their basic needs are met. And so long as we take care to view their lives and how we can help them through the lens of problems of living, not just mental health diagnoses. But let me take a moment to address a long-term structural issue, not only here in New Zealand, but around the world, that not only reduces our capacity to deal with small and large events in our lives, but which is actually being actively exploited by those who wish to manipulate us for political or commercial reasons. I'm talking about disconnection. I'm talking about loneliness. Now, loneliness has long been known to be a public health hazard, affecting us on so many different levels. What I don't think has been well articulated until recently is how loneliness may be our Achilles heel in terms of how civil society functions and is our connective social tissue. I want to talk about disinformation and false, rapidly assembled online communities and how these are used to exploit our sense of uncertainty, our sense of loneliness and disconnection, take advantage of the phenomenon of social proof, where the number of people who share the meme trumps any resemblance to fact, and can bleed the heart out of a cooperative society where many voices have their place and can be heard. Now, recently, disinformation on the internet has been framed as slovenly keyboard warriors spitting out toxic bile through their screens into the world. This is a vast underestimation of society's problems. Most of modern disinformation comes from motivated people leveraging a network of bot-controlled and human-controlled computers and smart devices. The threat to civil society and our mental well-being is changing and fast. They can finesse AI-generated content using algorithms on platforms trained on large language models to produce text and memes designed to maximize polarization. Now, these easily accessible open AI tools can write much of it, especially since the advent and explosion of articles generated solely through chat GPT interfaces, where the articles practically write themselves. Now, chat GPT is growing at a rate faster than TikTok did. Just think about that for a moment. Now, once cast into the right shape to trigger maximum engagement through outrage, anger, or similar seems to work best, it's then launched onto social platforms like Meta, Facebook, Instagram, WhatsApp groups, YouTube, Twitter, Twitch, everywhere. And this maximizes the opportunity to feed it to people to grab the greatest reaction, either liking or rapid growth through sharing or through evoking hate and angry disagreement, causing long screeds of rebuttal and further engagement signals for the algorithm so that it's shared even more widely, and those people will have their hackles raised to ever greater heights. Any of the above will do. Welcome to Fight Club. The Fight promoters with vested interests flog their top billing scrappers through paid ads to maximize the engagement and record-breaking purses for everyone involved. It's all about the money. And that includes the funders of the trainers and those who feed the AI products into the algorithm too. Now, the platforms take a largely hands-off approach. It's not our fault that people produce content that evokes strong opinions. We're just there to promote a healthy connection between people to aid communication. And this can only be a good thing, right? Wrong. The connection that can be a shining beacon of light goes dark when it cleaves people into warring tribes, urging them to go further inwards rather than seeing the common connections of humanity. Even if this seems like some kind of utopia in modern times, the least we can expect from platforms that have taken citizen-provided tax dollars in their early development is to stop making things worse. So we can see the deeper culprits of the mess we've got ourselves into, and one that we need to understand more deeply so we can teach our young people, everyone, exactly what they're being served on social media and some news platforms. Because what you and they are being served is not fact. It's mass appeal content designed to trigger outrage and polarize in order to sell your attention or to manipulate your views such that others can take advantage of your manufactured emotions, usually for votes or money, or leading to the corruption of institutions and then power. This is the world we're living in. This is the world that we need to be talking about, regulating more strongly and teaching our people to protect themselves from. But what is the world that people are seeking refuge from? Why are people delving so deep into this world? What might be the deeper vulnerability that these algorithms are exploiting? Now, I gave a clue earlier when I talked about what happens when connection goes dark. What we crave is deeper than just connection. What we desire most deeply is attachment. In recent years, I came across the work of Hannah Arendt and her Origins of Totalitarianism, which she wrote in 1951. Now, I'm not arguing a direct transposition of what she talked about here, but perhaps what we imagine being fresh problems in society are actually old problems reformatted for modern times. The question is, what makes people vulnerable to the type of illiberal, authoritarian memes proposed as solutions for our modern woes and being recycled and circulated through modern algorithms, much like pamphlet propaganda was circulated in past times? Arendt's idea is that what makes society and the people who live in it vulnerable to takeover is a lack of attachment. It's loneliness. Loneliness is the experience of not belonging to the world at all, which is among the most radical and desperate experiences of man. And this is not just a literal belonging. It's actually being part of a shared sense of meaning, a definite and certain meaning, an unequivocal meaning, not a blurry line where we have to kind of work to interpret the information, but certainty served to us on a platter. The algorithms on social media platforms drive you into the arms of others, filtering you into belonging to a story, no matter how toxic or illiberal that might be. And this is preferable to loneliness. Feeling a certain place for yourself, belonging to a story, any story, is part of how you make sense of yourself, your country, your tribe, and the times we're living in. There is an overpowering urge to matter. We need to be in a narrative, to be visible, to matter, to be part of a community where we feel valued and they reflect our values back to us in a rewarding way. They reinforce us for holding these values, even if we're just performing them, even if they just bring us a hollow sense of connection, however fleeting. The sugar rush of momentary tribal connection is preferable to being invisible, disconnected, atomized, and lonely. Now, the experience of this artificial algorithmic connection doesn't have to be remotely real. It can still seduce us and capture us, even if selling us a complete fantasy world. For example, how many times have we felt nostalgic longing for seemingly simpler times, pre-2018, pre-2016? A time when we all watched TV at the same time it was broadcast and came together at work to discuss the latest episode that everyone had watched. At a deeper level too, maybe we think somehow that everyone went to the same church and believed the same thing too. And even if your nostalgia for institutional solidity and small communities where everyone knew your name is genuinely longed for, what you think was a shared community experience may actually have been very different from your idealized picture of the world. Maybe that nostalgia is actually for an imagined past where reality was actually religious divides and racist TV shows that entrenched stereotypes that tacitly supported bullying, gender stereotypes, and victimization in schools and workplaces. But people want to create this same certain, concrete, predictable thing. And the artificial algorithmic connection allows them to do this, to join this artificial community that plays to their desire for a simpler life, less cognitive load, less stress, more certainty, satisfying a nostalgic longing for an imagined, idealized, but perhaps completely non-existent past. Perhaps, somewhat depressingly, people are now only capable of belonging to online communities where all the potholes and speed bumps of a real life have been smoothed out for them. Sounds far-fetched, but I think that this is where our atrophied skills and capabilities in managing the complex and uncertain realities of our world may take us. I hope not, but it's not a big leap to see our connecting social fabric fraying and rupturing in this way. Let's take the anti-vaccine groups as an example of a community of belief where this happens. Once you accept the basic premise of anti-vaccine groups that the elites are involved in a massive vaccine injury cover-up and secret payoffs from drug companies and see the information and say that the information is out there if only you would do your own research. And once you see the truth, then you see that actually this is about a third world order designed to take away your freedoms and enslave you forever. Once you're inside that world, you're constantly reinforced. When you join the online group and post inside this community, people are welcoming and write back with enthusiasm, acceptance, chiming in and agreeing with you. You're surrounded by people who express belief in the same ideas. You become bound to a tight group of people who believe all this anti-vaccine material is true and that they have secret, valuable information that most people aren't able to see. You're in a community with privileged knowledge, and it all seems concrete, indisputable, coherent. It all fits together. It's not messy. You have a special access pass to a different reality. And once you're backstage in your tight community, it's mightily powerful and infinitely more engaging than actual reality. Now, Arendt says that we humans have most likely always been like this. Whereas in the past, this secret shared knowledge giving you an all-access backstage pass to the real knowledge of the world may have been invoked through perhaps the church, or through civic institutions or even political organizations. Now, the vector of transmission is through online communities. And here's the thing. Not only is it so very easy to create these kinds of communities, we now never have to be alone or uncertain again. That reinforcing power to surround you at all times with repeated imagery and messages is carried around with you in your pocket, in your backpack, in your handbag. And all this seems more real than what you can see outside the window with your very own eyes. And this is why propaganda, because that's what it is so effective. People can learn to distrust their own eyes, ears, all their senses. Instead, they believe their imaginations, constantly reinforced by these pocket propaganda devices. Unfortunately, what this does is eat away at the connective tissue of society, like the necrotic bite of a white-tailed spider, leading to local tissue death, perhaps worse. So before I move on to the final part of my talk, with a little more hope in that, I asked GPT-4, a ChatGPT OpenAI algorithm, through my Watch app, if you can believe that, what we could do to limit the potential destruction of social fabric by AI-generated content delivered directly to our connection portals. Here's the reply that I got. If you could roll the video locally, please. Somewhat sobering, isn't it? But perhaps heading us down an interesting path to what might be done. My abiding fear, though, is that we need to grasp the nettle, and soon. More on that at the end. So here's some ideas on how to address some of the concerns that I've outlined so far. Let me come back to the metaphor of a connective tissue of society again. I'm going to focus on some key ideas for intervention in the report of the Community Wellbeing Expert Design Challenge, which I was absolutely delighted to be a part of. First, let's talk about connection and community folded in with well-being and resilience. Let me quote from the report here. The prerequisites for psychosocial well-being are safety, calm, agency, connection, and hope. The pandemic has disrupted all of these. This disruption plays out differently over time across communities, across different cultural groupings, and within individuals. So the investment challenge is to fund opportunities for people to connect and generate kindness, meaning, and hope together. One of the best things that we can remember we are doing as those trying to help others is that we are actually builders and connectors. We can and do help to heal wounds. And one of the things we're trying to build is connective tissue between members of society and around the skeleton of infrastructure that enables us to get on with our daily lives, and the institutions that we build and trust to take care of us, to govern, to pass laws, to ensure fairness and compliance by the law. So let's not just talk about these bones that seem like they are brittle, breaking, and under pressure, though they are undoubtedly. Our infrastructure and numbers of people we have to do particular jobs in society is very much under the spotlight at the moment. But focus on the sinews, the tendons, the connective tissue of society that binds our skeleton together, both individually and at a community level, that gives us flexibility. It enables us to move, respond, hope for a better future, and adapt to now and what may be yet to come. The people and their health, happiness, and mental and physical well-being, our relationship to the land and the ecosystems that sustain us, and the connections between us that bind us as communities. That is the work that you are doing right now. You are the builders and the connectors. You are the healers. Because without this connective tissue between us and the work that people like you do, we quite literally fall apart. So what are the tools that we have at hand for building this connective tissue that binds us and to the institutions of civil society? Certainly some of the suggestions in the Te Hau Toka Community Mental Wellbeing Expert Design Challenge report are going to be really useful, such as the emphasis on libraries as a way of improving social connectedness, reducing loneliness, and supporting mental well-being. With a community co-working space, a library of things, and skill and knowledge sharing, whānau and communities will have access to resources and live in healthy environments that support mental well-being. But also through creating places of refuge, restoration, and storytelling, scaffolded by a guiding structure to support the process, providing training and measuring the effectiveness of initiatives put in place, as also suggested in the report, allied to a community of practice model. But there is a bigger challenge that we must rise to meet. Loneliness is not only a public health hazard for the very personal and biological health deficits it can produce, as well as the psychological misery of the experience. Loneliness is a vector for the decline of democratic functioning. And the experience of disinformation for many people in many countries is that it does not reach them via one vector, but rather swirls around them in multiple forms, pervading and permeating their political and digital lives. It's more of a 360-degree encounter, and we struggle to avoid it. Online exposure to the deliberate manufacture of doubt and deliberate muddling and emulsification of disinformation with real-world concerns during crisis events through digital influence engineering techniques can prove profoundly influential upon the very definition of what is a crisis and the process of our social reaction to it. Not only have we been cleaved apart into rapidly deployed but false online communities pretending to create connection whilst actually exploiting us for money or power, we're encouraged to react even more angrily to create a self-perpetuating downward spiral of division that sets us apart from one another in false communities without any substantive, real connective tissue. This incivility and naked aggression we have seen also shows us another vulnerability. We have forgotten how to disagree well. Partly this is about shaping the environment so that we feel that if we disagree with someone about one opinion they're holding, then we must be loyal to our tribe to which we've become attached and disagree with every opinion that this person must hold. And then the argument becomes not just about the opinion, but the total rejection of not only the other person, but everyone that they're connected to too. Bottom line, this isn't just about people on phones typing out toxic tweets targeting virtue signaling woke lefties. This is about sophisticated AI-generated content spewed out in massive volume using open AI tools like GPT-3 and now 4, and more models will come. This is about carefully crafting and curating that content to produce stratospheric levels of outrage and engagement. This is about alienating people and offering them a false sense of tribe and community through exploiting their loneliness, precarity, and atomization. And finally, this is about disabling society's ability to disagree well, to be able to hold different opinions and yet continue to work together. This is about algorithms, attachment, and argument. And the internet should carry a AAA rating. We should be designing programs to both prevent this content from continuing to damage the fabric of society and teach people of all ages how to navigate this internet safely. So what now? Here's my take on what this means. We need to focus on algorithms, attachment, and argument. These are the modern threats of our times. We can do this through urgent and wide-ranging measures to regulate those producing and those platforms producing, publishing, and promoting this content. We need to reduce exposure to the devices that carry these memes into our frazzled brains. We can be developing and implementing policies to tackle radical loneliness and those who have been radicalized into harmful false communities that attack the very nature of nationhood and society. We can teach people how to disagree with civility again, but this can only happen if we tackle the first two on the list. We need to teach people to de-arouse, find calm, and stay calm, even in the face of threat and uncertainty, because only then can we be strategic and bring our skills on deciding and deciphering information that's been put before us by the algorithms that we're subject to. And finally, let's seek to connect in real life again. There's an irony here that I'm doing this over an internet connection because I just couldn't be here because of family illness. But what we can do is to create these safe places where you're gathering today and spaces that the ephemeral, rapid online communities are no substitute for. They are an altogether less connecting and more dangerous place to be unless we learn how to navigate these spaces and safeguard these spaces for ourselves and others as we sail through these ever-changing waters. Here's my last thought, which offers an alternative solution that we might also want to think about, as revealed on James O'Brien's phone-in show, which happens every weekday on LBC Radio in the UK. And it's worth checking into the whole conversation, so let me walk you through it. Ray, I was just listening to what you said about the internet melting our brains, and I just wanted to tell you what happened to me. James, go on. I don't really know any Muslims, but I started reading stuff online a few months ago, the EDL and that. And the more I read, the angrier I got. The EDL is the English Defence League, which is a far-right organisation. James, angry about what? Angry about these people pouncing off us while plotting to kill us. James, wow. Ray, I know. But they back it up by quoting from the Quran or the Hadiths and kind of prove all their points about Muslims without ever actually talking to any. James, so what happened? Ray, my wife told me to stop. James, what do you mean? Ray, I was getting angry with her, with the family, and everyone really. I'd start trying to convince everyone that we were under siege and they couldn't see it. The wife said I was making myself ill and making her unhappy, and she told me to leave the laptop under the sofa for a month. James, what happened? I was sorted in less than a week. Never look at the stuff anymore. Couldn't be happier. That's from James O'Brien, How to Be Right in a World Gone Wrong. The need for connection is real, and we need to respond to it as such. But this is going to take some serious re-engineering, much building and healing, some hiding of phones and laptops under the couch, and some detailed regulatory architectural work too. Thank you for the invitation to speak today and for your precious attention. Thanks so much.
here today to talk with you about the story and the journey of Hau Toka. I've been told to go behind the screen. I might come and beam myself a little bit fuller. Welcome to the forum. It's a really hard act to follow, isn't it? Following those speakers and hearing about some of, I guess, the opportunities, but also the warnings and the opportunities for connection, of giving back and learning together. I am from New Zealand originally. You might hear a little accent in there. I've been living in Australia for the past 30 years or so. And with my impeccable sense of timing, I decided to return to New Zealand and resettle around March 2020. And I chose Queenstown as home. And at that time, and as we're reminded by Glyn and also Saab and Adele, at that time, New Zealand seemed a bit like a safe haven, separate from the flux and the travel and people spreading the virus. And then, of course, things changed. Businesses stopped, travel stopped, the planes stopped flying. And we started to feel those feelings of uncertainty and anxiety about not only where we were, but where we were going to be. And within this context, we started to notice people around us handling these kinds of issues really differently. Some of us relished the thought of being at home for a while and being able to bake, maybe bake too much sometimes, and eat the spoils. Some of us became Zoom fatigued from constant meetings. Young children, thinking at first it was good to be at home, suddenly realised they were missing opportunities for play and opportunities for connection. Young mothers and parents facing the future with new babies and new ways of being, and not able to access the supports and community that previously had been available to them. And we were told to stay home. Some of our migrant communities were told to go home, even though they had made this area, the Southern Lakes, their home. The weekly trudge to the supermarket with masks started us to be aware that if no one can see the rest of our face, what's the point of smiling? We didn't know behind those masks if people were smiling, sighing, or crying. And maybe some of us didn't want to engage in that, of course, at a 1.5 social distancing. And so within this context came a group that you've heard of, the Wellbeing Group, who were working in communities and councils and in local agencies, who had noticed the fabric of connection within our communities changing and shifting. And as great communities, we started to become aware that we needed to take action. There was an urgency to act. And the Wellbeing Group, along with the partners, many of whom are in this room today, mobilised and activated to make some important change. One of the messages that I've heard in being part of the evaluation since August 2022 is the impact that COVID has had not only on ourselves individually, but on our businesses, on our hospitality industry here in this region, and on the connections that we have with each other, which Saab has pointed us to at a much greater level, at a much more higher societal level. But we noticed it here. Central government representatives came down to our area and told us we needed to pivot. We needed to be agile and respond. But as one of my interviewees said to me, you can't tell people about how to support workers' well-being in my business if you actually don't know anything about my business here. We needed to grow local opportunities. So my presentation today is telling the story. There is so much to cover around the initiatives that Hau Toka has supported, has contributed to and amplified. And this is just a selection, and I'm hoping as you see some of the photos that you recognise your own communities in here. that you recognise your own connections and the things that you have done. This forum is primarily a celebration of community and the way that we've worked together, and how wonderful to actually be here together to be able to do that. So this community has worked out what it cares about. It cares about connection, it cares about mental well-being, and that means caring about each other. So the first part of the presentation, I'm going to point to some of the initiatives that have been undertaken through Hau Toka, but clearly not by Hau Toka. It's by those in the room and those that can't be with us today, where we have partnered together to say, what's already working? What can we build on, rather than reinventing the wheel? And the second part of the presentation is, what have we learned? What have we learned as a group? And I'm hoping that can continue after we have our break, so that we can actually workshop together. And I'm mindful that the Mental Health Forum undertaken in 2020 did much of this really good work. But this is an opportunity to say, well, what do we need to keep doing as a community? As Adele said, the funding formally runs out at the end of June. It injected some energy and some resources into some of the things we're doing. But we don't just need the resources. We need those people in the room to keep doing what they're doing. So what have we learned from Hau Toka? And as a reference point, I think it's great to start with the 5 ways to well-being. We know there is a strong evidence base. This is an international evidence base with multiple studies, including randomised controlled trials and meta-analyses of what works to support our mental health and our mental well-being. So we know these things work. We need to think of giving our time, to giving to each other, of giving our presence and listening well. We need to be active and keep moving, and that's something that for many of us during COVID, stuck in our homes, we weren't doing as much of. Others of us were maybe finding the time to enrol in some new fitness regime. All of us handled these things differently, but that importance of movement and being active with our community or active in our own bodies. The importance of keeping learning and growing, of connecting with others, and of taking notice of things, taking notice about how we're adapting, our own well-being, what we notice in other people behind those masks or in those communities that we engage with on a regular basis. And of course, this work, while it's evidence-based, is strongly underpinned by what we know in Māori communities has been key for many, many years. Sir Mason Jury, way back in 1984, identified the importance of the pillars, the bedrocks to our well-being, underpinned by a strong foundation, the importance of family ties, of social connections, of being physically and emotionally well, of connecting to something greater than ourselves, that sense of not being in this alone. So these ideas, while evidence-based with multiple studies, have been around in our communities, in Māori communities, for many, many years. So when we were co-designing the evaluation of Hau Toka way back in August 2022, we had the question of, how do we know we've made a difference? If we are supporting what's already going on in communities, if we're engaging with existing partnerships and amplifying what they're doing, how are we going to know we're making a difference? And I love this cartoon. Here's some wolves crying at the moon saying, yeah, but are we making a difference? Are we having an impact? The moon keeps rising, but what's our connection to that? And what we've realised with Hau Toka in the evaluation is this isn't about attributing any of the changes in wellbeing to Hau Toka. It's about saying, how did Hau Toka amplify or contribute to those changes? And how can the work of people within this room continue to do that? So we had sort of 4 big questions. To me, evaluation's about, well, what did you do? So what? Now what? What are we going to do? And so we had 4 key focal areas for the evaluation. One of them was about, well, what did we do? How much did we do? Who did we reach? Who was reached through our initiatives? Where were things happening across our communities, across Wanaka, across Cromwell, Te Anau, Queenstown? broader regions that crunch on to those areas. What were we doing and where? What was achieved through the work that we were doing? And most importantly, I think, it's great to have accountability for the money that MB provided and injected some funds into the communities. Accountability is important, but what about learning? What about the things we've learned? So this again is an opportunity, this forum, to reflect on what we've learned from what we've been able to do together. So let's take these not in any necessary order, and let's look at what Te Hau Toka has contributed to within our communities here. And I'd like you to look at the first one, take notice. So for our mental well-being, we need to take notice of the things that make us feel well, the things that give us joy, the spring in the step, the connections when the masks came off and we were able to engage again face to face, like in today, a collective sense of a community. And so what Te Hau Toka's Wellbeing Group did at the very early stages of their work was they commissioned a co-design process. Many of you in this room, I'm sure, were involved in that, as Saab was, as an expert. The communities were experts in saying what was needed, what's right locally. It's great that we know what works in wellbeing, but what's going to work here? What's going to work in our region? Because we're different from Northland. We're different from other areas of the country. What's going to work for us? And so the co-design process by the Leadership Lab was a really critical foundation for thinking about the work ahead and what those priority areas might be. Young people, older people facing loneliness, isolation, new mothers, new parents, businesses that had once been thriving who are just now trying to survive. And so a set of principles started guiding the way. Cherie Spiller is a Māori academic and leader who talks about the importance of leadership as wayfinding. So you know where you kind of want to go, but it's messy and emergent, and you've got to adapt as you go. So wayfinding is that slippery, we're on a boat together, we're on a waka, but sometimes some of us have to put the oar in and sometimes others of us are sitting and waiting. Other times people will move together, other times there's some challenges. And so wayfinding leadership is about thinking about what's important. And these were some of the principles that guided Te Hau Toka's work. And aren't they great? Because they're so plain language. A blessing for me coming from Australia, where there's a lot of kind of languaging around empowerment and well-being and, you know, best practice and this and that. So these are real statements of intent. Let's make use of the opportunities that already exist in our communities. Let's not reinvent the wheel. Stuff's already been done that's great. Let's build on that and amplify it. Let's bring surprise and delight. What do we know about joy? What do we know about collective? Emile Durkheim had a term called collective effervescence. Have you ever felt that? That fizz in a room when you're dancing together or you're working together in synchronicity and you're engaging, a bit like some of you out there when we were trying to haul you in. There's a collective sense of fizz in a group. So we wanted to bring surprise and delight through Te Hau Toka's initiatives. We wanted to make sure that people had some fun while they were looking after themselves during those early times where things were unstable. Some of the initiatives didn't even go ahead because of COVID restrictions, but the groups adapted. They rejigged. They became again and put on postponed or cancelled events. And the community got it because the community were in it. Build on networks and partnerships. Communicate clearly and consistently. Many of you have seen the Te Hau Toka Facebook page, a great repository of resources, but also an opportunity to hear about what's going on in time to actually go. I often think some of those, you get Facebook messages or you get messages from groups and it's already passed. Oh, darn, I've missed that. But the messaging meant that we could look forward to things. We had some hope about what was coming up. And we were also able to celebrate what community groups were doing to make sure that they had good turnouts for their events. So those were some of the principles. So we took notice as a group of those. The second one is connect. Saab talked a lot about connection. It's a really key theme, isn't it, in terms of community well-being. And connection actually helps us to reduce cortisol. It helps us to reduce the stress response. It helps our immune systems. We actually do better when we're connected to others. So let's look at some examples of connection and what Te Hau Toka has done. And then I've got lots of photos to share where I think you'll probably see some of yourselves and some of your communities. So one of the first things that Te Hau Toka committed to in terms of bringing surprise and delight was the Community Connecting Communities Fund. So this is a micro fund of $1,000. I know many people in this room may have applied at some stage for that. It was a very low proposal writing exercise. You didn't have to fill in a form of 20 pages or report back. You had a good idea, you put it forward, you aligned it to what was important, so it wasn't ad hoc selection of, hey, that sounds like a good initiative. It was connected to the 5 ways of wellbeing and te whare tapapa. It was connected to what we know works in our communities. And so Te Hau Toka has been able to distribute these small amounts of money to actually build on what was already there. And what difference can $1,000 make? Well, actually quite a bit, if you think about it. And what we found from the evaluation is it can help groups to build on what they already were doing, but extend the reach of it. So I'm thinking here of the Queenstown Chamber of Commerce and being able to extend the reach of some of those discussions about housing and some of the issues facing businesses by having digital capability to stretch the reach of some of those meetings. It enabled groups to trial new ideas that someone in their community had, or a need that they saw pressing for bus trips, perhaps for older people to be able to come to a local warehouse when their slippers wore out or their kettle broke, because sometimes that's not easy, and sometimes online shopping isn't something you feel confident about. So being able to go on a bus trip that instrumentally got you somewhere, but also enabled you to connect with people as you were travelling on the bus. The third one is it brought energy. We got $1,000. We're doing something worthwhile. We're doing something important. And it provided, and I think this is a really important one for us to reflect on, Te Hau Toka and the work of many groups in this room. Your work has provided an opportunity to make it okay to speak about mental well-being. It doesn't have to be hidden. It's something that we can have an explicit discussion about. How are you going? What's making a difference? What do you need? How can we give back? The second, and these are lovely large pictures of 2 people in the room here, Anna and Lisa, who was our community navigator here and sadly has moved on to other things, but still in the community and probably still very much part of any group. She's here today, so that's awesome, eh? And these community navigators, again, are connectors. I heard many things in the evaluation about these people having the resources and the time, but future focused in terms of what are the opportunities that are coming up next that we can use for our communities. They had the time and the energy and the potential to be able to connect many people and many groups to each other who were doing good things in our community. So thank you so much to Lisa and Anna for the work. Absolutely, the work that you've done and the high praise that community has for people that take the time to care. Special skills in being able to navigate and to connect people in that way. The partnership grants. Now, these are larger amounts of money, so this is another initiative of Te Hau Toka to support groups in doing things that we already know are working really well. But we want to give them a little bit more impetus, maybe to extend reach or to build on those things. And these are just 4 examples. The Good Yarn workshops, of course, which many people here may have even attended, peer-to-peer learning about mental well-being. Really strong feedback that these are highly valued by individuals in having those conversations. Whakamana. iFly here in Queenstown, a business community partnership with the Wakatipu Youth Trust and Epic Living to provide really strong, solid empowerment programs for young people that might be vulnerable in making that transition from primary, intermediate to secondary school. So an opportunity to support them in navigating their feelings, help them to regulate some of their emotions, and giving them skills in being able to trial new things, including having a fly at the end of the day, which again, if anyone's done that, takes a bit of guts when you first get in there. Is it going to work? So they got to hear about engineering concepts too. It provided opportunities for the schools to influence and re-emphasise issues of science, technologies, engineering, maths and the arts through a very dynamic program. Then we've got the Queenstown Business of Chamber of Commerce that I've already mentioned, an opportunity to amplify and again spread the messages about current issues that are facing our communities. We're not leaving those things behind. We know housing and we know the hospitality industry is facing still the long tail of COVID. So what do we do? How do we navigate these issues as a community? And then, of course, the Upper Clutha Seniors Partnership with the Reconnecting Seniors Group that were formerly, I think, known as the Champions of the Older Persons, a collaboration over a 12-month program of a whole range of initiatives to support older people over 65 years of age that might be feeling lonely or isolated, giving them opportunities. So these are initiatives that have been, again, built on, not created at all by Hau Toka, but built on and amplified by support through those partnerships. And so here we see some photographs of some, I bet there's someone in this room, everyone in this room will at least know someone in these photos. So the Friendship Shuttle, the opportunities for people to travel together, to have outings and events to address loneliness. The Seniors Outreach Program and many other similar programs that have been across our 4 communities. And I'd like to tell you a story of connection that someone talked to me about. So this comes from the Friendship Drive. The Friendship Drive provides shuttle services to support people to travel. So imagine you're an older person who maybe your eyesight's not as good as it was. Maybe driving in winter's a bit scary and the roads are crazy anyway, aren't they? Maybe you feel a bit vulnerable when you go out because your mobility isn't what it used to be. And maybe because of those things, you don't get out as much as you used to. What if your kettle breaks or you need a new pair of socks or slippers? And some of the local stores might not have what you need, and the warehouse and Kmart are a long way away. Your family might not live close to you. They, again, might not be as regular visiting to be able to bring you those things. But the Friendship Shuttle gives you both the opportunity to go places, to go back to maybe where you were born, your hometown, you haven't been there for ages. Or it might give you the chance to go down and get an eyesight check in Invercargill, or to go around and do some community events with others. So I heard a story about one woman in this group who always asks to be picked up first and dropped off last, even though it adds a significant amount of time to her journey, because she sits during the day staring at 4 walls. And the Friendship Drive is an opportunity for her not only to go and get what she needs from the warehouse, but to connect with others. And the person that shared this story said that this woman can sit with tea that is bone cold because she craves that connection of being with others. To me, that's the power of what Saab was talking about, the importance of connection with each other. It isn't the phone, it isn't how much money you've got, it's those connections with others that we know supports our well-being. So let's think about keep learning. What has Hau Toka supported or contributed to in terms of keeping learning? We know that growth in ourselves helps us to feel better. We feel like we're on a journey. It gives us hope for the future. So there have been a number of initiatives, again, supported through Hau Toka's Community Connections Fund, but also other partnership grants, and support in brokering some of these events, even by promoting them in the newsletters and on the Facebook page, that has enabled us to connect again and to create those connections with each other, learning what works, what people need to connect. And I had the wonderful opportunity of heading down to Te Anau for a few days to do a whole lot of interviews and to talk to people in that community in Fiordland about what had been able to be initiated through Te Hau Toka. And I actually thought going to the Vintage Museum was going to be probably one of the dullest things that I had to do, because, you know, I'm not greatly into museums and I'm not greatly into vintage museums. And I was there for about 3 hours speaking with these great guys. And Bob told me several stories of how the Vintage Museum was a hub for these men that were kicked out of their house by their wives. Go and do something. You know, they'd been engineers or architects or mechanics in a past life, and they wanted to do things with their hands. So they were able to restore vehicles, but they were able to build friendships and bonds where people would drop in and share and talk and have a cuppa. And more importantly, Bob shared a story with me, and it was this one here that's on the screen, about somebody coming in, maybe someone who's a bit isolated. There's not much in town if you're a bloke travelling through, or you're a guy who maybe doesn't want to go into a shop or a cafe. But you can go to the Vintage Museum and you can wander around. And the history connects us. We see the old vehicles. We remember back to our farming life if we were on a farm. We connect over the history, as this quote says, the history of us opens the conversation. And that, he said, was good for the men working in the shed, in the big men's shed, the Vintage Museum. But it's also great for that guy, because that might be, he said, the first person he's talked to all day. So again, the opportunity to learn about the past, to celebrate, but also to have hope for the future through, again, those connections and learning together. The next one is giving. This is a really strong theme across the communities in Te Hau Toka, was the way that we've learned about how to give more of ourselves, our time, our energy and our presence. It's not about the gift of a physical object, it's the gift of giving. And there's plenty of examples of this, and I'd like to point out the Easter hampers and the midwinter Christmas hampers that in each community have been fostered through Te Hau Toka. Young children in primary school creating cards for those hampers that would then be full of all sorts of goodies for midwinter Christmas, or for people that were perhaps isolated in their homes. And volunteers went out, volunteers like yourselves giving of your own time to go out and deliver those packages and parcels to people that were identified as perhaps needing a bit of support in our community. How good that we were pulling for each other. And this quote says, "You give to yourself by giving of yourself." And I want to tell a story. And this makes me feel very emotional. I'm not quite sure why, but I think you might feel the same way. So I heard about the hampers being distributed by volunteers, and one of the volunteers told me that she took her son from the Cromwell Cubs with her to deliver a hamper. And they came up to a house that seemed quite dark. It was midwinter, it was cold. And they knocked on the door. There weren't many lights in the house. And an elderly man came to the door in a wheelchair. He was wrapped up, visibly cold, with a scarf around his neck, a woolly hat, and blankets around him. And when the volunteer and her son explained that they were giving this hamper, she said, "He was so touched that we gave him the hamper. You could feel it in his voice. He was really overwhelmed. And you know what he said to us? You know, it's nice to think that someone thinks about you, that I haven't been forgotten." And the mother, as she walked away from the house with her son, asked her son, "What was that like for you?" And her son said, "You know, Mum, I feel really happy that we helped, but I feel really sad that he's by himself." And to me, this is a story of compassion and kindness. And for that young boy, 9 or 10 years old, to learn the power of compassion. Turns out there is a science of compassion. Kindness is contagious. If we're around people that are kind, we end up becoming more kind. Isn't that awesome? We're primed for compassion. And some of the things we see overseas right now in the Ukraine and other areas, we wouldn't say we're primed for compassion. But we know that that is a great connector in our community. And again, the power of giving of ourselves. It's not the gift, it wasn't the hamper. It's that I haven't been forgotten. Being active. Let's have a look. This is just a couple of weekends ago. The Latinos for New Zealand hosted an awesome event where community came together. I ended up behind an empanada. I don't even know what you call it, a stand selling jamón de queso empanadas, and I tried to say it kind of, and then, it failed. Especially when you're vegetarian, it's really hard to send ham and cheese, but, there it is. It was a community event full of activity, full of dance. What do we know about dance? Collective effervescence. It gives us energy. It helps our immune system. It connects us in synchronicity with each other, as does singing. Te Hau Toka has supported a number of singing initiatives. Singing together brings us together. The Wakatipu walkie-talkies, walking together again. There is science that if people walk together and notice the environment, their footsteps start to be in synchronicity with each other, and they stay talking to those people they walked with longer than they would if they hadn't walked together. How interesting. There's a science about the importance not only of movement, but walking and talking together, of challenges, of physical opportunities to move outside our comfort zone and to be together with others, doing things creatively together that build our physical well-being, but our emotional well-being as well. I want to highlight, as I get into the second part of the presentation, something from the Mint Trust. They ran this amazing camp for young people, and they do a lot of great things in the community, supported, and I need to say this, by a group of volunteer workforce, many from the local high school, that get behind these events to make them viable. So again, most of the opportunities that Te Hau Toka has supported are supported by other partnerships in other communities as well. It isn't just a direct relationship. There's a lot behind this work. And the story here was about one of the young men who'd never been away from home on his own before. And he went to the camp and he had his buddies there. He had activities. He was able to do the flying fox and again engage actively, but also learn. And he was able to stay overnight. And this interviewee said, and I remember seeing him in the morning, and it was like his face couldn't believe he was still there. He'd made it overnight without his parents. And the next week the school had a camp, and that young man was able to go off to school camp. The power again of opportunities to connect, to be active, to learn together and to be supported. Community counts, Place counts. And then learning. So what have we learned? How is learning fostering well-being? Well, we've learned by a number of our multicultural festivals, Diwali, learning about other cultures, learning about the commonalities between us, as well as some of the differences that excite us. The Matariki Festival in many of our areas was a celebration of the cluster of stars, but in Matariki, the Māori New Year, it's also a representation of reflection on the past, current status and hope for the future, absolutely connected to well-being. So Matariki festivals through Te Hau Toka and through other partnerships often supported people being able to come together to do some of that reflection and to learn about ourselves and others in our community. Southern Māori Business Network, bringing business leaders together to talk about what's going to work for their own businesses here in the region. And here, of course, is a good example of a business community partnership. One of the elements of the MB funding was certainly to do things for business, and that's a reflection of Hau Toka that was sometimes quite challenging. And partly I think it's because of that quote that I said earlier this morning. It's not just about what might work for business. We've got to know the business. There's got to be an opportunity for us to be doing things together that benefit both community and business together. I recently interviewed a young man who works in hospitality here, and he said, you know, now as we're in recovery, our bosses are telling us, you know, be positive. Queenstown, Wanaka, they're great places to be, being really positive about the community. And he said behind the scenes, though, some of us are still really struggling. We're struggling with housing, we're struggling with the shoulder season when we might not get stable work. We're struggling with the cost of living, but we're representing this positive image about how great our communities are. And they are great, but we need the permission to be able to talk about some of these issues. And of course, through some of these conversations that are current, we're having those conversations. What are the needs now and what do we need to do? So I'd like to now introduce a short video. It's a nice break from my voice, and it's an opportunity to hear from Ray Lamb about an investment that Hau Toka has made for the future, a legacy piece, if you like, that doesn't only benefit the southern region, Southern Lakes area, but benefits the whole of the country. So I'll turn to that now.
Kia ora, ko Ray Lamb ahau. I'm Chief Executive of Te Pou. We're a national centre which specialises in workforce development for the mental health, disability and addiction sectors. We're really thrilled to have partnered with Hau Toka Southern Wellbeing Group on the Youth Mental Health First Aid Program. This is a really exciting international initiative which we're bringing to Aotearoa for the first time. It enables or supports adults to work better with young people, with our rangatahi, to help them to identify and to deal with, or manage at least in the first instance, some of those common challenges that young people can find in their lives. The program's designed for adults who work, live or care for young people, people such as teachers, school support staff, parents, sports coaches, community groups and other leaders and youth workers. We know that there's a real need for this kind of targeted support for young people in Aotearoa. We know that about half of all mental health challenges occur before the age of 18. We know that early intervention can reduce the impact. And ensuring adults that work with youth have the skills and confidence to support them properly and to provide first aid to that young person who's experiencing a mental health challenge or crisis just makes a huge difference in their lives and to the outcome for the person involved. It also helps to normalise having some of those tricky conversations about mental health, and it helps to reduce stigma. Hau Toka's youth specialists identified the need for this program and have worked with us since September 2022 to adapt it so that it's fit for purpose here in Aotearoa. Hau Toka has funded the development cost to adapt the program for this country. That work's nearly complete, and the first instructors will be trained in June. These instructors all live in the Southern Lakes region and will teach mental health first aid to their communities. We're really excited about this because this is just the first steps. The intent is to offer the program across the country so that other communities can benefit, just as the communities will in Southern Lakes.
My time's nearly up. Unlike the other speakers who've stayed exactly to timing, I've gone a wee smidgen bit over. So I'd like to swap through a couple of slides. There will be a written document that is shared from this forum today. But I'd like to again re-emphasise the ideas that hopefully I've shared through some of those examples, that Hau Toka has provided and sanctioned some discussion about mental wellbeing within our communities, that it's amplified things that were already happening. And perhaps the best opportunity to end the presentation today is with a quote from one of the community participants I interviewed in Te Anau, who reinforced a lot of the messages on this slide, which is, what have we learned from doing this important work? What have we learned about trying to reduce some of the administrivia, getting good ideas up and out? How have we learned to share and profile? And I think it's a fitting way to end. It was the unknowns. We didn't know what to expect or what was actually going to happen. We were in the same boat, but some people seemed to cope better than others. COVID made me stop and think. maybe for the first time in a long time, about my own well-being and what I can do to support others. And I learned an important thing. When the going gets tough, we all come together to work it out. We're stronger together. Thank you.